going to take a look at the 13 English colonies here. We had finished up talking about how those 13 English colonies could be split into regions based on their geography, their economy, what they grew and were able to sell, and then the culture that developed partly because of the geography and the economy. Now we're going to look at a bigger picture, these 13 colonies that were governed by England or Great Britain. We're going to look about the fact that right next door was land claimed by the nation of France. The people from there are called the French people. In between land claimed by England and France is this yellow part, this disputed land, which means both England and France said this land belongs to them. That's going to lead to some interesting interactions between the nations of Great Britain and France, as well as the Native American nations. Nations like the Iroquois, nations like the Chippewa, and England and France. We're going to do that by looking at a little teeny tiny village called Deerfield in Massachusetts. Now, in Deerfield, Massachusetts, there were some things that happened. And we are going to look at that. Okay, maybe we are. Maybe we are not. Yes, we are. Okay. Sorry about that. We are going to look at what happened in the little town of Deerfield based on some artifacts from the time that they happened, from the very early 1700s. So the first set of artifacts, I'd like you to stop and think, what do you notice about this? What is it? And then what action does it suggest? What would someone be doing if they were using this artifact? What time of year would it be? What story might you infer from the use of this artifact? Why might someone need to be using this particular artifact? So I'd like you to stop and think about that and discuss that a bit. And just so that you can see in perspective, this is the artifact, the pair of artifacts. And you can see the size of them compared to me. It was me back before I was wearing glasses. I had contacts on instead, so I look very different, right? But at any rate, you can tell a little more detail about them. They are artifacts in a museum, so they have the date. You can see what they were made out of. They're 33 75/100ths of an inch long, so that's a little less than 3 feet. 11.5 inches wide, so that's a little less than 1 foot wide. Here are some more details about them. These are John Sheldon's snowshoes. We know snowshoes were invented by the Native Americans. They were also used by the French and the English to travel over heavy snows. The hexagonal weave of the rawhide thong helped make the snowshoes lightweight yet strong. The wooden tails on the snowshoe frames acted like rudders. They were especially useful for long-distance trips in the snow. A person experienced with snowshoes could walk in them just as rapidly on snow as without them on the ground. So those snowshoes are one artifact. Here is our second artifact. So take a look at that. Again, what do you notice about it? How is it similar to the snowshoes, our first artifact, and how is it different from our first artifact? What action does this suggest? When might you be using it? What might you be doing? And what story can you infer? What can you put together from looking at just this artifact? one bit that might help you is to see the size of that artifact compared to my hand. Again, you can see it's a pretty important artifact. It's in double casing, so people like me can't try to touch it. But it is smaller than my hand. So that might add to the story that you infer from this. Who would use this? More details. It's from the year 1690. It's made out of leather. It is 9 8/10 of an inch long. So it's not nearly as long as the snowshoes. They were almost 3 feet long. This is not even 1 foot long. It's 2.5 inches wide. You've probably come to the conclusion that it is a shoe. Take some time and measure your feet. Are they longer than 9 8/10 of an inch? Are they wider than 2 5/10 of an inch? When would you have had feet that were this small? Now some details. It's an everyday shoe from the late 17th century, the 1690s. It's a latchet tie shoe, dark brown leather. More fashionable shoes of that same time would have had a buckle, so it's not very fashionable. In fact, it's a work shoe. They had the flesh side of the leather turned out since they didn't need to be waxed or polished. There are holes in the latchet for them to be fastened, kind of like the same idea of when you put laces through shoes. In the tongue for laces of leather, cord, or ribbon. Early shoes, like this, were not fitted for left and right feet. They were made straight. So this is not a left shoe or a right shoe. It could go on either foot. Ordinary shoes from this period are rare. So that would explain why it was in 2 sets of protective containers. So we've seen 2 different types of shoes, and now at last we see this artifact. Look closely at it before I ask questions. There are some obvious things in it, but less obvious. You can see there is not just 1 layer of wood that makes up this artifact. There are 2 layers, and you can see a pattern of nails that have been hammered in to reinforce this wood. Hopefully it's kind of obvious what it is, but the way it's made is not very familiar to us. Having looked at these 3 artifacts, the question I'm going to leave you with today, there is a story that connected these 3 artifacts. The story starts in Deerfield, Massachusetts in the year 1704. What do you think happened with this door and this tiny shoe and these snowshoes? We'll take that up